Hello, and welcome to Talking Toddlers, where I share more than just tips and tricks on how to reduce tantrums or build your toddler's vocabulary. We're going to cover all of that, I assure you. But here, our goal is to develop clarity, because in this modern world, it's truly overwhelming, especially during these past 2 years. This podcast is about empowering moms to know the difference between fact and fiction, to never give up, to tap into everyday activities so your child stays on track. He's not falling behind, he's thriving through your guidance. We know that true learning starts at home, and Talking Toddlers, this podcast helps you develop that with clarity, confidence, and clear communication. So let's get started. Hello and welcome back to Talking Toddlers. I'm Erin Heyer, your host, and I'm so excited to continue with our series where we're covering how eating and feeding and chewing skills are related, or better yet, entwined with speech and language development. So today we're going to cover the 9 to 15-month-old developmental explosion. In previous episodes, we covered the 0 to 3, 3 to 6, and 6 to 9 months. So please, if you haven't listened to those, please go back and listen now, because you'll see the whole progression of development and how everything is entwined, interrelated, and connected as a whole person, a whole being. So let's jump right in. 9 to 15 months is truly a massive developmental explosion. Again, you and I both know, whether you're a mom or a dad or a grandparent or a caretaker, right? You're really loving and honing in on each and every developmental phase. But this 9 to 15 month is huge. You're basically watching your little one go from a stationary position and maybe babbling ma, 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 ba, 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 ga, 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 totally, engaged with you and smiling and gooing and cooing, I guess, and giggling, I was about to say, but really moving from that stationary babbling, mild interactions to a fast-moving, sure-footed, speaking several words, and truly understanding most of what you and all the other adults in his or her life are throwing at them. Appropriate for a toddler, of course. You're not reading the encyclopedias or, the Wall Street Journal. But this physical development with being able to stand on 2 legs and start to move on this universe or in this world on 2 feet parallels the food and eating explosion. So your baby, we talked about last week where you're introducing and beginning to transition from 100% breast milk or bottled milk to some purees or some smushed foods like avocados, but is basically bland introduction to this world, just really literally wetting his whistle, these pureed foods to a wide variety of tastes, different textures, temperatures, and flavors. Hopefully, you heard me loud and clear last week that it's one meal, one family, and that whatever you as a healthy parent and healthy adult model has on your plate, that's what your baby's going to gravitate toward. You take small steps. You don't take your 6-month-old or even your 9-month-old and give them your plate and say, here, go for it. Of course not. But you're introducing all of these different tastes and textures and flavors to help him or her develop this beautiful relationship with healthy food. Let's step back quickly and just look that all of these episodes that I'm diving deep and helping you expand your thinking, helping you connect some of these dots, it's really to understand how motor skills, both gross motor, those are our big muscles. Learning how to walk is a gross motor skill. Learning how to sit up before you walk is a gross motor skill. And then it kind of fine tunes into eating and speaking. And it also fine tunes into being able to grab and hold a utensil, not only for eating, but ultimately when they're 6 and 7, to really be introduced to good handwriting and use tools outside of, the meal. But this whole connection of the motor skills, fine and gross motors, and speech and language, learning development are all interconnected. So let's just kind of pick the highlights, thinking of all the tummy time, right? Building that front part of the body, which also leads into crawling. And crawling is truly one of the hugest milestones that literally branches out to getting him or her up to 2 legs and walking, but wiring the brain for the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere and integrating his body in this 3-dimensional world. It builds social communication and engagement with you. All of that beautiful tummy time / crawling. You're also, during these first 6-9 months, are reading to him or her every day, not just at bedtime. I have a whole episode on how do you read to babies, but that's building attachment, attention, engagement, and providing that beautiful, rich language of your and his or her native language. You're also narrating, and in a future episode, I'll dive deep into what is narrating and what does that mean. I think a lot of parents hear this, but they don't really understand the ins and outs, the pros and cons, and it's not an all or nothing kind of thing. Again, it's a process, but that you're providing this rich verbal communication through everyday activities, right? When you're giving them the bath, you're having this meal with them, you're getting on the floor and tummy time and crawling, all of that where they can listen and process, they engage with you, they inquire about things in their reaching environment, and they're really connecting your spoken words, your spoken language to the environment through nouns and verbs and feelings, right? Ooh, this is hot. Oh, I'm sorry. I accidentally bumped your head. A lot of just rich, rich language. On that note, you're also feeding them. In the beginning, as I said in previous episodes, it's all about nutrition and survival and that first 4-6 months. And then your baby is strong enough and healthy enough to start to engage with you during these feedings. But then slowly at 5 months of age and 6 months of age, you're beginning to introduce some different foods and different textures and different flavors and getting the baby excited to be engaged with something beyond the breast or the bottle, right? But at the same time, we're building these oral motor skills through a healthy suck and swallow pattern. And now we're transitioning to helping them learn. That's the operative word there. It's a process that they learn over time how to chew adequately and appropriately and smoothly, and that helps support the co-articulation, the jaw, the lips, the tongue, the breathing, inhalation, exhalation, all of this. That's what co-articulation means, stringing a whole bunch of sounds together and helping them verbally communicate through all of this. So it's all interwoven. And as we begin to introduce different types of foods, and in another later episode, I'll dive deep on what foods and when and how do we not only help build the oral motor skills with a wide variety of foods and textures, but also how do you feed the brain and a healthy gut? So all of this cognitive learning, emotional self-regulation, it literally feeds a healthy young child growing and developing. So one of the major areas I want to focus in on during this 9 to 15 month, where there's this massive developmental explosion across the whole child, right? The whole being. And that's, it's funny. I have to admit that after 35 years of practice, I am, especially in 2022, really looking at the whole child. And I've always looked at the motor development, the gross and the fine motor. I've always looked at the emotional development, how do they self-regulate? How do transitions go? How do they tolerate when they're being redirected or they're given instructions or they have to learn how to share, all of that. But in 2022, I'm really stepping back and looking at this whole child because I think we as a world, but here in America, really have to learn how, as the adults, learn how to navigate this modern world so our children grow as healthy and as happy and as thriving as they can, right? So when I used to think that whole term, quote unquote, whole child was a little bit kind of, kumbaya-ish. And if you're old enough, you understand what kumbaya is. But I really do think it's because of technology, because of the convenient lifestyle, because we're moving all the time, some of the more basic whole child being has got lost. And I've mentioned this in previous episodes, and this is really part of my mission, is to help new parents, whether you're 20-something or 30-something, or maybe you're a grandparent and you're looking at, how do I help my grandchild and my, young family kind of take the best of both worlds, right? This modern day technology and all of the advantages that we've created and developed over time, mixed with what God has given us as a human being, and how do we marry these, the nature nurture kind of thing. So the big thing I want to focus in on today is the importance of developing a feeding schedule between these 9 months and 15 months, because a lot happens motorically. Again, like I said, the gross motor and the fine motor, but we're really introducing healthy eating habits. And it goes, again, so much deeper and broader. But let's step back. The newborn, as you know, typically feeds on demand. And most parents end up doing that in those first month or month and a half. It helps with, the milk coming down. If you're struggling in those first couple of days or couple of weeks, it gives the baby a lot of calories to kind of maintain the blood sugar and helps them really kind of get acclimated literally to this, real live 3-dimensional world. And there's a lot of new learning going on with the mom and learning how to breastfeed. Or, if you're struggling, and I do have to kind of just say this here, in my perfect world, we would all breastfeed. I know that there are situations where that can happen and we have to, make do with plan B. But, I'm talking about a healthy birth, full term, and that there aren't any kind of secondary issues going on that we then have to dive deep into. And we will in further episodes, things that can happen, that are happening in many, 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 many families nowadays that we have to peel apart. But I wanted this series of looking at what a typical healthy kind of, in medicine, we often say it's unremarkable, right? It's uncomplicated, that we just kind of follow what the nature is. And so when I'm talking about these 9 to 15 months. That's what we're talking about, So newborns go on kind of feed on demand. And then as the babies get older and their stomachs literally get bigger, like within those first, 15 days, 30 days, then we need to help them learn and develop a predictable hunger cycle. And what that means is that there's meal times in which we eat for nutrition and connection and communication and sustenance. And then there's, other kind of growing times where you're not eating, but it's a period in which you can rest or you can work on other developmental areas such as, gross motor or cognition or language, which, all of those things are sprinkled in during eating times too, like we've talked about. But eating should be in its own little period during the day. So on average, when we're talking about, a 1-year-old, give or take, or a 15-month-old, a meal time should take about 20 minutes, and then a snack should take about 10 minutes. And we'll talk later more specifically on what types of food you can begin to introduce your little one on. But today, with this kind of focus on developing a feeding schedule, I want parents to really think about, do we have these eating times or meal times and then growing times? And, your little guy or gal, whether they're 1 year old or 2 years old, are still napping. So they're awake about maybe, anywhere between 9 or 10 hours a day. And how do you structure your days? And so I think it's really important that from the beginning or as early as possible. So if you're listening to this and you have a 2 or 3 year old and you have some questions, then you want to maybe go back and think about how your day is structured. Because I think this modern day that we're living in, kids don't really experience or learn how to manage hunger. And that is truly a healthy eating habit, to be able to feel hunger and be able to connect. Your mind and your stomach are talking to each other and say, I'm hungry. This is what hunger feels like. Now, you're not starving your child. Hunger is a good thing. And us adults need to be able to feel that too and regulate that. So one of the issues of modern day life is that we have literally food at our fingertips 24/7. 7 days a week. And that many parents instinctually, I think, minimize hunger with their kids because they're thinking, she or he, they're growing so much, they need to feed themselves, and if or maybe they're fussy, they're hungry, they're having a meltdown, they're hungry. The whole like hangry thing that us adults kind of joke about. But with a little guy, a 1-year-old or 2-year-old or a 5-year-old, that hangry stuff can be problematic. And so when we're helping them transition to eating tabletop or adult food, it's really, really important that we help them understand what hunger feels like, and then they can sit down and enjoy a meal. Because, and I've mentioned this in previous episodes, you and I both know we have to be honest with each other. Many, many, many families permit their little guys, because they're quote unquote little, they don't want to sit at the table, to graze all day. And that can really backfire. It interrupts their whole digestive process, right? They never fully feel sated, and then they never fully feel hungry. And I think this is leading into kids who have attention issues and mood problems, and they're grumpy, they have low engagement and inconsistent energy. And it's really important that we, as the adults in the room, step back and look at this honestly, because it's all about parenting intentionally and being present and understanding where is my child and how can I help them hone these skills and move to the next phase, right? But if we expect our children to sit down at mealtime and eat or consume or appreciate a nutrient-dense dinner with us, then that means they can't graze all day, every day. They're not going to be interested in eating, this succulent chicken and this, al dente broccoli with Himalayan salt and butter. They're not going to be interested in sitting there and just hanging out with you and talking about your day or sharing this delicious meal together, because they're moving and shaking, and they're kind of in their own little rhythm. And we, as the adults, have to help them understand and build a tolerance for their routines, right? And so, as I said earlier, meal times are about 20 minutes long. And when you do give them a snack, which in this time period from 9 months to 15 months, you're still feeding them either through the bottle or breast. But at the same time, they should is the operative word there. They should be learning how to become a pretty good cup drinker. And it's not a sippy cup. That's another episode. Sippy cups are not motorically or not designed to support healthy motor development. I'll say that again. Sippy cups are not designed to support healthy oral motor development. So an open cup, or they can have a recessed lid. They can use a straw by, 12, 15 months. They definitely can be independent in using a straw. Again, not a sippy cup, but a cup with handles. All of these motor dexterity things in which they can hold and bring to their own lips, and then their lips come around it with a good seal because they have good disassociation. We talked about that in previous episodes, but their lips can protrude and then take a sip that's controlled with their tongue, because their tongue can then elevate to the palate of the mouth and trigger that natural swallow reflex, right? So all of these things can be introduced from 8 months to 15 months, and they should be doing that on a regular basis. Yes, they're going to, in the very, very beginning, when they're 5 and 6 months old, mom and dad, like I've said before, will have to hold that cup and help them understand how these pieces fit together with their body. So I just want to reiterate here that this grazing style of living that many, many, many families, I have seen it, and I've seen it increase over my 35 years of practice, then bleeds into, the older toddler and the preschooler and the kindergartner and then the 10-year-old, that they're just snacking all day, usually high processed foods, usually a quick hit. And we talked a lot about the pouches last week in that last episode. So please go back and listen to that. I know it's become a modern day lifestyle that we're always having snacks in our backpack or in our purse or in the car. But it's a really, 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 really unhealthy habit for our toddlers, for our older kids, for our high schoolers, for us adults. And if there's one big bandwagon I'll jump on is that snacking 24/7 or whenever you feel like it is just a really unhealthy habit. And so if you, mom, dad, grandparents, if that's your lifestyle, I really encourage you, honestly, from the heart, to think through that and to understand, if I want my child to have a healthy relationship with food, to have really good eating and speaking skills, let's start now. Let's see if we can change some of these habits. And in future episodes, I'll dive deep. I'll give some very strategic methods in which you take baby steps, no pun intended, but you take these small steps to help change some of these eating habits, because that's what they are, right? We choose every day what we want to do. And so, if we can really be honest and evaluate that piece of our life, just think how much all of our kids would benefit. There's a wealth of research around the understanding how the human body needs to feel hungry, and that's normal. That's part of that cycle, right? We get tired at night and we go to bed, and then we wake up in the morning and we're hungry because we've been fasting for 8 or 10 or 16 hours, depending on your age. But these little guys, it's okay to feel hungry sometimes. And we can say, don't, have a snack right now. Dinner's going to be ready in 20 minutes. Why don't you come in here and help? Right? And so they build a relationship with where food comes from and how do we prepare it? And isn't this exciting? And they have anticipation. And at the same time, you're cognitively building their understanding that there's a beginning and a middle and an end, that we, go grocery shopping, we plan our meals, we cook our meals, we eat our meals together, and then we clean up, that you're helping them understand the sequential process of all of this part of their day, right? Their nutritional aspects of their day. That's how it's all interwoven. And again, I'm just going to go back and emphasize this, that many, many parents will say, oh, but he's growing, he's hungry, he's picky, he's this, he's that, she needs the calories. And I say, these are empty calories. The crackers that you bring, the pouches that you use, the so-called protein bars, it's highly processed. It melts in your mouth. There's no chewing involved. It is full of sugar and sugar substitutes, and a lot of vegetable oils. And I promise you that we'll dive deep into, the best food choices and how do you help your kids, build a sophisticated palate, or at least a palate that is appreciative of real food and not packaged food. I have a couple of colleagues that are nutritionists and really, really understand this. And so they're in the lineup in the very near future. But meanwhile, just think about, if you want your child to sit down and have a meal with you that is nutrient dense, they can't be snacking all day long. So just to put it in perspective, do understand that this period from 9 months to 15 months, that you are combining some breast milk or bottled milk with adult foods. So being mindful that during these meal times, when they're eating with you, then you can supplement during snack with some bottle or breast milk, right? And so, but usually by the time a child is 15, 16 months, we really want them to be weaned off of the bottle or the supplementation of, that we've kind of tipped the scale here. And around 5 or 6 months, you're just beginning to wet their whistle and introduced that, 95% of their eating is still breast milk or bottled milk. And then by the time they're 12 to 15 months of age, they can easily and healthfully be weaned off of milk in general, whether it's from the bottle or the breast. And I just want to share that there's a great site. It's called The Weaning Room. And you can look it up, theweaningroom.com. And there's baby-led feeding instructions and a lot of research. The woman's name is Gill Rapley, Gillrapley. I'll have the link down below in my show notes, but it's a lot of helpful information. And I just think it's really, really important, again, to be mindful parents and to have a plan. And there's going to be a wiggle room. It can be a couple of weeks here, a couple of months here, but not significant in the sense that, now as you approach say that 18th month or the 24th month, they should be off of all bottles and all pacifiers. And again, we can dive deep in how to do that, but it's really, really important that that you have a plan, and that if you don't know how to get to the other side, then please seek advice. Talk to your pediatrician, of course. My purpose here with this podcast and my memberships and my courses online is all about empowering the parents. So if you find yourself talking with your pediatrician and they're, a little bit more reserved with, seeking outside input, like I said, pediatricians are great medical experts, but the nuances of development, especially speech and language or oral motor, is not, in their scope of practice. But if you find like they're not giving you the support or hearing you, and they're taking more of a wait and see approach, all babies are different, he'll find his way, he's growing, it's all about just calories in, then you can pick up the phone, or you can, look on the internet and find someone in your area who specializes in early feeding or early speech and oral motor development. And so I encourage all parents to not settle and not just listen to their pediatrician or listen to their daycare provider. I believe it's all about prevention and being proactive. And I have just, like I've shared with you guys before, over my 35 years of practice, I've seen the numbers skyrocket. And I look at our modern lifestyle. I look at, the dynamics of the family, the dynamics of the school system, the dynamics of the medical system. And it's not necessarily in our child's best interest. So we, I think, have to be much more cognizant about how we create this home environment and help our little ones not only grow and learn in speech and language, but to thrive across all areas. And that's where I go back and start, preaching that kumbaya with looking at the whole child and how all of these pieces fit together. The tummy time that leads to crawling, all of the reading experiences sprinkled throughout your day, narrating to your little guy or your little gal, and then the feeding and eating and building that relationship. It really is how you're wiring the brain, wiring the human connection to build healthy social emotional skills, cognition, and understanding of how this world works, motor skills from the gross to the fine, and speech and language, which is to me the foundation to all learning, right? What is our long range goal? And I'll kind of conclude with that in the sense that all parents really want, their child at 6 and 7 years old to be able to sit at a table or a desk, to stabilize themselves, to be able to hold utensils, whether they're eating or writing, maybe to be able to write a letter or a little short paragraph, to draw a picture, to do some math skills, to be able to, build a craft or to share a meal. All of this is that gross motor stability, to sit up, to use their arms and their legs, to be able to have the fine motor skills to talk or to eat, to have the focus, the attention, the planning skills, to organize themselves, sustain their attention and their interest, to connect with others at the table, whether it's a small task at school or with their brother or sister or having a meal with the family. And you don't want your child to kind of poop out before you even begin, right? Lay his or her head down on their arm on the table and say, "Oh, I'm too tired. I can't do this. It's too hard." And they fall off the chair or they wiggle or they're, impulsive and grabbing things and laughing or crying or any of that. No, a 7-year-old should be able to sit at the table and do these things with some fine motor dexterity and some verbal skills and some understanding. Ultimately, that's what our goal is. And it starts when, in utero, of course, but also when you first bring them home. And then those first 6 months and building them to be able to sit in that high chair and then helping them, connect all of their oral motor skills and connect their speech and language and learning as the fine motors get better and better and better because they have a strong gross motor skills. And then, looking at routines, looking at building regularity in their day, and then they begin to predict and they begin to anticipate and they understand how things are connected based on their experience, based on their language, based on their social, emotional, exchanges with you as the family. So all of these are fitting together. And so with that 15-month-old who is running around now and talking and laughing and following directions most of the time, you have helped lay that foundation, and you're ready for that next big jump, that really next big developmental explosion. And, between that 16 months and 24 months, wow, again, another big explosion. And so next week, we'll continue with the series of just laying the understanding of how these chunks of time are so important, but at the same time, you are in the driver's seat, mom and dad. You can slow it down. You can thin out the toys. You can thin out your schedule. You can, know when the meal times are coming. You are in charge. I know it feels really hard and overwhelming, but it's not that complicated. And it's one step at a time and one element at a time. And keep it simple, mom and dad. Okay, that's it for this week. And if you like what you hear, please share these episodes with family and friends. Help me spread the word. Help me reach more moms and dads just like you who are looking for some truth and clarity, because navigating this modern world is a little bit overwhelming and we're all in it together. We want happy, healthy, capable kids. We can do this. Thanks. See you next week.